For over 1,000 years, the Middle Ages cast a long, shadowy veil across Europe, an era marked by towering castles, plague-ridden streets, and whispers of witchcraft in the dead of night. It was a time when superstition ruled the mind, kingdoms clashed in endless wars, and the line between survival and death was often razor-thin. But beyond the myths and legends, what was life really like in the Middle Ages? What did it mean to be a peasant living under the weight of a feudal lord? How did knights truly live beyond the battlefield? What horrors did the Black Death bring to the everyday household? And what secrets lie buried in the cold, forgotten ruins of medieval Europe? Tonight, we journey back into the heart of the Dark Ages, a world of unrelenting hardship, violent power struggles, and mysterious beliefs. This isn't the fairy tale version you learned in school. This is the raw, unfiltered truth of medieval life. Brutal, bizarre, and utterly unforgettable. Welcome to a time when the light of knowledge flickered in the shadows and every day was a fight to survive. To understand life in the Middle Ages, we must first descend into its foundation, the world of the commoner, the peasant, the serf. These men and women formed the backbone of medieval society. Bound to the land they worked, most never traveled more than a few miles from where they were born. They rose with the sun and often collapsed with exhaustion long before it set. They lived in cramped, smoky huts with no windows, floors of dirt, roofs of straw. Food was simple, often scarce. Dark bread, weak ale, and perhaps a bit of cheese or salted meat if luck allowed. And luck was rare. But life wasn't just hard, it was dangerous. Disease stalked the villages like a silent predator. The Black Death, a plague that swept through Europe in the 14th century, killed tens of millions. Entire communities vanished overnight. People abandoned their loved ones in fear. The dead piled high. Priests muttered final prayers through trembling lips, and if it wasn't disease, it was war. Castles and kingdoms rose and fell in an endless tide of blood and ambition. Knights, the so-called noble warriors of Christendom, lived by a strict code, chivalry, honor, loyalty. But behind the shining armor were men bred for war, trained to kill, and sworn to lords who viewed lives as currency. Not all were villains, but not all were heroes either. Meanwhile, in the shadows of the church, another kind of power ruled. Religion was more than belief, it was law, identity, fear. Heaven and hell weren't metaphors, they were destiny. Heresy meant death. The church offered salvation, but it also demanded obedience, and when the whispers of witches or demons arose, trials followed, torture, fire. This was the world of the Middle Ages, a world of unrelenting extremes, where beauty lived beside horror, where loyalty was repaid with betrayal, and where every man, woman, and child walked a narrow path between the living and the damned. But this is only the beginning. In the chapters ahead, we'll uncover how people loved, worked, fought, and dreamed in one of history's most misunderstood eras. Step carefully. The past is darker than you think. They made up over 90% of the population, yet history rarely remembers their names. They were the peasants, the nameless laborers who fed the kingdoms, tilled the soil, and carried the weight of medieval society on their backs. But theirs was not a life of quiet simplicity, it was a life of survival. Bound by law and custom, most peasants were serfs, not quite slaves, yet far from free. They could not leave the land they worked, they could not own property, and everything they produced belonged to someone else. Each year they owed taxes to their lord, in grain, in labor, in livestock. If the harvest failed, they starved. If the harvest succeeded, they still went hungry, so their lord could feast. Their homes were one-room hovels, dark, damp, and crawling with vermin. Fires burned constantly, not for warmth, but to keep the damp from killing them in their sleep. Children died young, mothers died younger, and if a man lived to see 40, he was considered old. Illness was a constant companion. Without doctors, medicine, or sanitation, even a small cut could fester and become a death sentence. And then there was the church, ever present, ever watching. Peasants were expected to attend Mass, pay tithes, and live in fear of sin. Not understanding Latin, they listened blindly, hoping their obedience would save their souls and perhaps ease their suffering. Hope for many lived in the next world, because in this one justice was rare, and mercy rarer still. They were forgotten by kings, overlooked by history, but without them there would have been no castles, no conquests, no kingdoms at all. This was the life of the medieval peasant, not romantic, not simple, but relentless.